Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of All Access, and coming to you from a remote, undisclosed location after a little bit of a break from coding and so on, and a little bit of more focus on the bigger picture. And today I want to talk about some of the things that have been on my mind. They're mostly about law, mostly about how to improve the world so as to accommodate crypto better. So let's just jump into it. There's a lot to discuss as usual. So let me see if I can actually forward. Okay. The very first issue that I want to talk to you about is something that one of the crypto OGs, Christopher Allen, brought up. And I want to share it with you, which has to do with the management of private keys. So as crypto becomes more and more uh, commonplace, as people end up owning more and more digital assets, it's going to be more and more the case that the court system will want to explore, will want to know about people's digital assets. And I did not know this until Chris attuned me to this issue. But apparently, the courts often will try to collect private keys during discovery. So, when there's a divorce happening, or when there's some kind of a conflict, one side ends up demanding from the other side private keys during discovery, which is a huge problem if it were to remain unchecked. Now, the courts, of course, they're not, they know how to deal with all kinds of old school assets, but they don't know how to deal with these newfangled inventions that came up only during the last 11 years. And that's somehow been abused a little bit and somewhat okay at times. But really, we need to sort of one up the game here and get them to understand how to deal with these assets. The issue that Chris points out is the fact that private keys serve a lot more functions than identifying exactly where the assets are. During the discovery phase of any kind of a conflict, what one side wants to know is how much in assets does the other side have. Now, the way to do that, and as most of you who are savvy with crypto will immediately know, is to actually look for public addresses corresponding to the private keys, not to demand the private keys themselves. There's a difference between, figuring out which houses somebody owns for the purposes of discovery versus actually transferring those deeds to the court system. And so that's kind of what's happening here in the analogy. The fact that the private keys are somehow part of court proceedings makes them incredibly vulnerable. So these keys can be very, very valuable. And the court system is simply not geared up to provide that level of security. I know how we guard our private keys at our labs, and it's nothing compared. I mean, there's no comparison to any governmental management of anything else. I don't even think that nuclear secrets are guarded as securely. In fact, those of you who follow this know that for most of half of a century, for about 50 years, the super secret password on the briefcase that contained the nuclear codes was 0000. So in the U.S., the president cannot go anywhere without the nuclear codes. There's a dedicated person, a Secret Service agent, and he or she has the keys in a briefcase, and for 50 years they just had 0000 on that briefcase. So pretty crazy. It's my hope that the government would be able to manage these keys privately, would be able to exert the level of care required, is absolutely zero. It's just not what the government can do. It's also not what the government should do. It's just too hard. If there is a legitimate need for discovery, as Chris points out, a public key would do the job. A public address would do the job. Private keys are about the authority to control. They are not about the authority to obtain information. So I didn't realize that this was an issue, and but it is a critical issue. So by demanding the private keys instead of the actual information on how many assets or which assets somebody has, the court opens itself up as a target. It opens itself up to hacking. It opens itself up to all kinds of compromise, loss, forgery, etc. And the assets will move. Somebody will hack in. The Lazarus Group, the North Koreans, or whoever else who's hacking these things. All of the world's secret services are funding their operations through this kind of hacking. They would come in and take these coins. So There is no other way there's no way to transfer private keys to somebody in a way where the information is destroyed after a period of time. Once they're out, they're out. So that's why you have to guard your private keys so diligently, and I'm sure you do. That's why the court system and the governments should do whatever they can to not force us into a situation where we let go of private keys and allow them to be handled by machinery that's not exactly under our control. So there's a bit of an educational problem going on here. As always, Wyoming is at the forefront of legislation in the United States on this issue. I've spoken to Senator Loomis from Wyoming. She has been incredibly crypto savvy, and she's worked diligently to make sure that Wyoming plays a strong role in advancing crypto regulation, and I should say legislation. Actually, stronger than regulation is legislation. They have passed laws to facilitate quite a few kinds of crypto asset management in a company. So it sounds kind of boring, but it's also kind of critical to make sure that as we integrate with the real world, that the real world does not force us to do things that go counter to our core operations. So it's a fundamental question. So give Chris a follow if you're interested. And Wyoming is doing foundational work as always. And make sure that if you receive such a request, you fight back accordingly. There are quite a few authorities that can help, and it would be good for all of us and the space to make sure that we educate the court system on how to handle private keys. So it's about a decade. They're following about a decade behind. They were about I would say 5 to 8 years behind the internet revolution. They're about 10 years behind the crypto revolution. Not very surprising, and about the expected pace, I would say. So it behooves all of us to ensure that we educate the folks that are touching these assets. Now that brings me to my second issue for the day, which has been pretty high on my mind, and that has to do with censorship resistance. Censorship resistance of many L1s is currently being tested across the globe after the CFTC in the United States placed the Tornado Cash address on the OFAC list. Now, if you look at the OFAC list, I kind of browsed through it. Most of the names are Arabic, and when I Googled those names, they were mostly associated with ISIS. And there's a crap ton of database entries. The database is free to query by anyone. Feel free to look around. It's really interesting. This is the first time that a smart contract got placed on the OFAC list. So what the ramifications are of this are kind of unclear. It is pretty clear that if you directly touch this smart contract, then you are breaking the law in the US. If US law applies to you, then this is really a big problem. Now, does the US law apply to you? Particularly, the US believes that its laws apply everywhere. But depending on who you is, it may or may not. But nevertheless, this is a very serious step. The OFAC list is no joke. Interacting with an OFAC listed address, the US treats it as interacting with a direct terrorist, and it's a criminal liability. You will go to jail for it. It's no joke. And someone I love dearly, Virgil, ended up going to North Korea to teach them how to use crypto. Ended up sending 1 Ether, I think, from North Korea to South Korea, something like that. And he's facing, I believe, multiple years in jail as a result. So it's really rough. This is a really serious step. Now, because of this, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. The Tornado Cash address is on the OFAC list, so immediately quite a few services like Infura ended up. They're based in the United States. The entity that runs it is Joe Lubin's company, and they ended up having to place a ban on all transactions. They won't accept a transaction that touches the Tornado Cash address. Now, that's really quite a test of censorship resistance. Now, you can interact with Ethereum and not go through Infura. You can run your own node and try to submit your own transactions. But the mining pools also ended up accepting transactions that touch Tornado Cash. Now that's getting to be a little bit more complicated. So one was the API nodes that don't accept these transactions. The other are the miners. And if the miners are not accepting these transactions, now it's a different issue. Now the corresponding entity in a proof of stake world are block producers. So in this case, miners are refusing to create blocks that contain a sanctioned transaction. They are building on other people's blocks that contain such transactions, but they don't build their own blocks with such TXs in them. Now, what does that mean? It means that as long as there's some miner out there that's not bound by OFAC, then then Tornado Cash transactions will go through. So Ethereum is currently able to route around this kind of censorship. And but there's another level of censorship where mining pools might not build upon such blocks. They might actually start ignoring blocks that contain these sanctioned transactions, and that would actually be quite catastrophic in terms of censorship, because by nature of proof of work, what happens is that hash power is concentrated in only a small number of hands, and that hash power ends up being controlled, or more than 50% of the hash power ends up being controlled by 3 or 4 mining pools. So if those 3 or 4 mining pools end up censoring in the second manner, where they won't build on sanctioned transaction containing blocks, then suddenly you've got censorship going all over the place. And this, we can all think whatever we want for OFAC, etc. The real question is, if this can happen for this purpose, can it happen for other purposes? Were it to happen for some other reason, someone doesn't like, some entity, there's some kind of a rift, etc. Would we have the tools to detect censorship? And if we had the tools to detect censorship, what could we do to actually route around this? What could the system do as a system designer? What could one do to try to protect the privacy of individuals who want to get around the censorship being in place? So OFAC, of course, is just one example. That's one example where obviously there's serious criminal liability for not compliance. But this, as I said, this could happen for any kind of censorship. So it's a bellwether. It's a telltale, it's a litmus test for how censorship-proof the substrates are. And what we're going to find out, I believe, is that it's actually quite problematic for proof-of-work chains. So despite what people say for proof-of-work, it's actually quite fragile because it inherently requires that power, the ability to define the shape and contents of the blockchain, is always going to be centralized. Why? Because proof of work is so energy consumptive that to be economically viable, it requires centralization, inherent centralization. That's why people pool. And the moment people pool, that decentralization that attracted all of us ends up going out the window. Now, what about proof of stake chains? Well, they're untested now, and it all depends on the distribution of stake and control over that stake. So depending on who's staking, where they are, who's delegating to whom, you have an emergent network. That emergent network for a truly decentralized system is not one that anyone can control. So some nodes are going to be in the United States, some nodes are going to be outside, some nodes are going to be wherever else. So they're subject to other rules. And it's going to be, no one can tell you what's going to happen in that universe. We know, for example, that the Ethereum merge is going to happen soon, and I have great expectations for it. But I suspect that, well, at least we know now that a lot of that stake is on nodes, what they call validators. But despite the large number of them, because of the way they do accounting, it really is a small number of nodes, all I believe in the United States jurisdiction. So if Lido ends up performing censorship for any reason whatsoever, then I don't know what happens to the Ethereum system. So Ethereum 2 system after the merge. So that's a real concern. Similarly for Avalanche. So we have a grand distribution of stake across the globe. I believe we have validating nodes on every continent minus Antarctica. So that's a pretty good distribution. But exactly who will enforce which rules, exactly what percentage, is in which jurisdiction, I actually don't know. And as one of the things that I plan to study in the coming weeks is the stake distribution. But so it's emergent. No one can tell you what's going to happen. But there's one thing that I can tell you, and that is my next point, and this is the important point. It's impossible for any single chain to accommodate jurisdictional limitations. Think of every single chain blockchain, every single chain system, Bitcoin, Ethereum, these are single chain systems. Solana, single chain. Solana pulls all the plugs, does all sorts of funky stuff. It's essentially going down the hill with all the plugs pulled to get their speed. But they end up building a single chain at the end of the day. Post-merge, Ethereum is a single chain. So when you have a single chain, you can't possibly accommodate all of the jurisdictional limitations around the globe. They're in conflict. Right? The Russian restrictions are very different from the Chinese restrictions, very different from the American restrictions. So we have this situation where there is some emergent network with some emergent stake distribution, changes on a daily basis, and can change, very fluid. And it may or may not be good enough. That's really the best that anyone can say scientifically. It may or may not be censorship proof for what you need. And you might find yourself in a universe, in a blockchain, where it starts enforcing certain rules that might not pertain to you, that you don't want enforced, that go against your core tenets, whatever they might be. So once again, I'm not focusing on Tornado Cash anymore, but talking generally about censorship. So where does that leave us? Well, the subnet architecture that lies at the core of Avalanche, that most people did not discover for many, many, many months, is exactly designed for this scenario. What's that scenario? Multiple jurisdictions, each with their own rule sets. The rule set for the American crowd ought to be different than the rule set for other people. The rule set for wherever else, if they start having restrictions, if they start passing laws and regulations that say you may not interact with this particular hexadecimal address, well, then that chain is not suitable for people who don't have that restriction and want to interact with that address. So subnets are designed exactly for this. You can have an Avalanche subnet designed for American users with American rule sets in them. And you want to be compliant to American rules, use that one. If you want to comply with Chinese rule set, use the Chinese subnet. That was exactly the plan we had in mind when we were architecting our system. And this is the sensible way to do things. Why? Because it actually accommodates the real world as we have it. And I keep saying this, and it's a political level. You see, when you look at the OGs in this space, the people who've been around for a long time, the people who got into the space early, they all have this extreme libertarian bent, and I don't. But a lot of people came to this thing. They were attracted to this universe because they had this fundamental belief that governments should be abolished, that there should be one single world currency, it should be Bitcoin, etc., etc. And so the reason for that is essentially tightly coupled to the underlying technology. You had to have that belief, or else you couldn't exist in the Bitcoin universe. Bitcoin cannot accommodate these jurisdictional limitations. If enforced by multiple miners, if miners start rejecting each other's blocks because a block produced by another miner contains a sanctioned transaction, then suddenly the censorship proofness goes out the window. And that would severely undermine the value proposition of Bitcoin. So this is the world that we live in, and as I said, these extreme libertarians were attracted to this space because they have to say that we have to abolish all jurisdictions, all laws, etc., across the globe because their system cannot accommodate them. But there is now something better. Systems like Avalanche can have multiple rule sets that are in conflict with each other, that cannot exist on the same network, on the same chain, because they support more than one chain. Now, that, of course, changes the game a little bit, and then there's a whole issue of what do you do when you cross chain boundaries. Well, that's a separable issue, and that's an issue that the laws, etc., accommodate quite well because we're used to being able to enforce rules on the periphery when going from one rule set to another. So this is a very interesting universe that we're moving into. We're going to see a lot of L1 chains get tested, and I cannot wait to see this universe. I know we have the best technology. I know we have the best technology when it comes to speed. I've said this many times. When it comes to scale, I've said this many times. But also when it comes to decentralization. We had more actual validators than anyone for the longest time. I haven't actually paid attention in the last several months. In the last couple of months, I should say, and it's. I'm sure that if we were to lower our threshold for validation, we'd have even more validators inside the Avalanche network, and I know we have the capacity to create the world's most decentralized C chain, in addition to being able to accommodate jurisdictional differences by creating subnets. So I think we stand poised to take advantage of this new emerging situation where lawyers, regulators and legislators are looking at this universe, at our universe, and trying to apply some of their old rules on us. And they comes with a very heavy stick. And the kinds of systems that we're going to see that will address this are going to be really, really interesting. And I'm confident that Avalanche's technology is at the very forefront of, in terms of providing opportunities to accommodate whatever people might want of us. We literally built the most flexible underlying infrastructure. So with that, I've been thinking about this. What else have I been thinking about? I've been thinking about some of the Avalanche updates. And we recently issued some one new Avalanche client update. So take a look at the pace of evolution of the underlying client. It's mind-boggling. I know how hard my team works. I know how hard the contributors work. So there's a lot of effort that's going into making the underlying system faster, better, more elegant, etc., etc. And so there is a new release. I think it's called 1.7.18, and it's go and deploy it and update your code. If you are running a validator, it's time, and there's much more to come in the months ahead that further speed up and optimize the underlying substrate. As we speed things up in the underlying layer, then what we're going to find out is very straightforward, that we can actually open up the amount of gas we consume per time. And that in turn means we can execute faster, we can execute more, our capacity, network's capacity grows. Speed is going to be what it is now, which I'm super happy with. I did some transactions with a friend of our family, and it was really fun, like side by side. The hardest thing to do was to get my phone, the QR code to be recognized by his laptop camera. Took like, I would say, 3 to 5 seconds. Once that happened, the transaction was, before I could turn my head and see what happened, the transaction took place and it got immediately updated in my wallet, sent some tokens back, and it was really fun to watch it ping and pong, and it's the world's fastest chain. It's really, really cool. But also these optimizations and improvements give us higher capacity. We can clear more transactions per second, just as fast as we always have. So, but there's more stuff happening. Castle Crush is coming to Avalanche. So Castle Crush is a game that you all know and love, probably. It's a studio you know and love. 75 million downloads, 1 million MAUs, monthly active users. So they are doing a seamless Web3 integration on Avalanche. Apparently it looks like this. I saw only the screenshots. I haven't actually been able to deploy an early copy of this myself, but Castle Crush is coming, and I'm really, really excited. Apparently the integration is perfectly done, what you would expect from a AAA studio. It's not just sort of an add-on, it's not something that's on the side, but it's inherent to gameplay and integrated beautifully with all the speed and convenience that you would expect from Avalanche. So I'm thrilled to see this. I hope you are too. There are so many more games coming. I have lost track. I think I tried to run down a list of the publicly announced ones two episodes ago, but there's so much more out there in the pipeline. So in tandem with this, our daily gas usage has reached an all-time high. So the Avalanche system with its subnets is clearing an enormous amount of transactions per second. So once again, we got a lot of pushback when we initially launched our system from all sorts of people, right? And the Polkadot people were attacking us left and right, saying all sorts of stuff. And look at where they are now. They're doing auctions. They're doing parachain auctions. I know what I need in life, right? I need a power brick for my phone. I need food for the family and whatever else. I need a bunch of things. The last thing I need on earth is a parachain. I don't need to own a parachain. I don't understand that. It's the world's most asinine play. And we kept telling people that the right design for a system architecture is one where independent activities happen independently without having to share resources. That's how you scale. And not by sharding. Sharding, the good old-fashioned way, would imply that you're trying to sort of do some kind of load balancing, some kind of hashing. And if you do that, you'll get gamed. And, if you started out with a single chain and you sharded K ways into K different shards, well, you'll end up having K plus one problems because you now have K problems plus the coordination problem. So, and everybody will be on exactly the one chain that started. So it's really not the right way to design things. I've said this for many, many years. I said this to Vitalik umpteen years ago when I first got involved. I think it was 6 months after Ethereum launched that we had our first meeting about how to scale Ethereum. So sharding is not going to do it. It's this architecture that does it. And the funny thing is that what I've noticed is that people fight you and fight you and fight you while they quietly rediscover what you already knew, what you already had been saying, and they invent new names for them, and then they come up with it. So so we're going to see various different forms of this built into different chains that want to get high performance. But who was here first. We got this right from the get-go. The architecture was right, and still remains right, and we're achieving enormous amounts of daily gas usage. One of the reasons for this is DeFi Kingdom. That game is hot. It's running hot. That chain is hot. There's a lot of stuff happening on that chain. People are trying to arb stuff. There must be a bunch of value to be usurped by being fast on that chain. So that's what's happening, and it's really interesting to watch, and it'll be still interesting to see how this evolves over time. I fully expect this number to fluctuate. It's not just going to be one big high growth thing. So, maybe they'll make some changes into how they account for gas. Maybe they'll put some penalties for people who don't bring value to their chain because it is running very, very fast. So if they do that, the numbers can drop. And if that happens, that's perfectly okay by me. What we know is this architecture scales to this level, and it has the capacity to scale without a limit on the y-axis. Let me say that again. You can have any arbitrary number on the y-axis, and we can reach it by forking off more subnets. You cannot do this with a single chain system. ETH1 cannot do it. ETH2 cannot do it, will not do it post-merge. Post-merge, they're going to have a lot of difficulty. You have to do a hard fork to unstake all of those locked tokens, and there's a lot of pain up ahead for that. So what we can do today is what other people are striving to do in their slow fashion. So it's really good to see this, and we're going to see this fluctuate some, I think, but the overall trend is going exactly where I said it's going, and that's going to be fun to watch. And a bunch of people were saying all sorts of things. You can see that there's a dip in this graph. So when that was happening, I was getting a bunch of people saying, "Oh, Avalanche is dying," whatever. No, it's not. There's, depending on the economic activity thresholds, if the system has capacity and the costs are low, then suddenly a whole bunch of activity will come to your chain. So that's exactly what you see. DeFi Kingdoms ended up having a lot of value, and it's accommodating it, and so people are going there to do a lot of transactions. C-chain activity is continuing exactly where it was a few months ago. So it's really great to see this, and we're going to see more of it with more subnets. So when one wanes out of existence, or one wanes out of popularity, I should say, not existence, wanes out of popularity, another will take its place. There's another thing happening on Avalanche. This is kind of cool. This is a new asset class that we call first film offerings, FFOs. So you know about ICOs. This is an FFO, so film finance offering. Essentially, a bunch of indie filmmakers usually want to do some indie film, and that scene has changed a lot, and I want to talk about that a little bit. But suppose they want to do a film, they could go to Hollywood and pitch their idea. I'm sure they do, some of them, um, and and they could try to get financing that way. But that's a dog eat dog world. Hollywood seems interested in Marvel reruns, Marvel comics, movies for 15-year-olds, movies with cartoon characters. They're unabashed about it. Like they're, yeah, I haven't watched a movie with a character with any depth in it in many years now. It's really sad. Um, but in any case, so suppose you're an indie filmmaker, you want to make something with substance. Well, there's a couple of trends that are really interesting. The cost to make a movie is actually has dropped tremendously. So you and I can film a movie that looks professional, that looks fantastic in 4K, without incredibly expensive equipment. So that's technology has, as you know, there must be a Moore's law for film, and the tech has improved to the point where for a couple of $1 million, we can film a fantastic movie. Now, that's not going to drop anymore because the technology has improved fantastically, but the human costs, the location costs, etc., that forms a lower bound. So if you want to make something that people will watch, it'll take you a few $1 million. Now, not a lot of people have a few $1 million, and so you need to raise that money somehow. And so what do you do? And you know what's the payoff? Suppose you had a few $1 million. Would you put it into the making of a movie? Well, it depends on what the payoff could be. Now, it turns out that there's a different trend, a second trend in the movie industry, which is that because of these subscription services like Netflix, like Amazon Prime, like whatever else, the HBOs, etc. of the world, the ones that reach direct to consumer, they are in a war and they bid each other up. They bid up against each other for indie movies, indie series. So this is actually a great time to be a filmmaker. I think you could actually make fantastic stuff, and we are beginning to see the sort of the first signs of it. Right, you're beginning to see soap operas from around the world, and some of the Turkish soap operas. A lot of my friends watch Turkish soap operas and ask me about them. I happen to have watched none, pretty much. Except a few episodes of Magnificent Century or what have you. So I hear that Korean movies are obviously, well, we know that Korean movies are fantastic. I think Korean series, Polish series, I'm told, are fun to watch. So all around the globe, there was talent that was pent up, and they just didn't have access to capital. And now, because the threshold to make movies has dropped, they are itching to go. And these services can buy these movies, get them translated, get them dubbed, and distribute them across the globe. It's a fantastic universe that we're in. And so what's the problem? What's the hang up? Well, it's still too hard to get access to capital. If you're a Polish filmmaker, you're a Turkish filmmaker, it's the amount of money that's available to you is limited. It's not your reach is limited. Your reach is going to be limited to your circles, to VCs who are willing to venture into this space, which is very, very few. So what do? Well, that's where the film finance offerings come in. So you can raise money for your next movie through an FFO, and then make your movie. And depending on how you set things up, you end up paying back the people that invested in whatever you were making. I think this is fantastic. If you wanted to invest in movies, I wouldn't put, if you have a few $1 million, I wouldn't put all of it into one movie. You want to slice and dice it and make, to have a thesis, perhaps, and I don't know, whatever tickles your fancy. Allow sponsor a bunch of movies on the climate change problem, documentaries on climate change, historical movies, things that raise awareness for whatever your issue might be. Have a product placement or have your own placement. Richard Branson used to do this. He used to appear in 007 movies. He gets patted down in the background at the airport or whatnot. So do a cameo. whatever your fancy might take you, wherever it might take you, it's worth exploring. And now we have FFOs happening on top of Avalanche. The one of the first ones is I Am Not Satoshi. It's a movie on who Satoshi might be, and I can't wait to see this documentary. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. It's about who Satoshi might be, as I mentioned, and who it definitely is not. And there's a lot to discuss on that front. Where is he now? Why are his coins not moving? Who's got the keys? What happened to them? What about the false claims to being Satoshi? What about Dorian Satoshi? I want to know about Dorian. The guy who, when I last heard of him, he was being besieged by the press, and he was getting into a car saying, "I just want a sandwich." So the man is a model to us all. So, of course, let me just also add, I in no way condone what happened to Dorian, by the way. I'm just personally curious. But what happened to him was quite unfair. I also I'm not a big fan of trying to hound people who want to be anonymous. But this particular documentary is going to be done ethically, and it's going to be pretty interesting, I think, because I did speak to the team that's behind it, and they seem really cool. So that takes me to the end of my discussion for the day. Oh no, there's more. WAGMI, we had a new release of the subnet EVM. So we have multiple VMs on our network. We have prototype VMs that support WASM that we haven't made public. We're looking at other virtual machines. Supporting Move is a no-brainer, and it's a very easy effort for us. We haven't made those public because there's no point. Nobody wants to use Move right now. There's no community. Nobody wants to, as far as I can tell, very few people want to use WASM. If there's more of and they're not doing anything complicated enough. They're not doing something in WASM that you couldn't do in Solidity or isn't already done in Solidity. So, but if that were to change, and I hope it does, if that were to change, and I hope some of you who are listening to me start to change it, because we do want diversity. If that were to change, we can support them very easily. One of the virtual machines we support is called the subnet EVM. So it's EVM for subnet use. And one of the most requested features for the subnet EVM was the ability to easily and quickly change parameters for the network. So as a system designer, you might want to change all kinds of parameters about the network. For example, you might want to change the amount of gas being consumed per second. If your network is running too fast, too hot, you might want to reduce it. If you want to change the whatever else that you might want to change about related to gas, is now super easy to change with the latest subnet EVM. So this was the number one most requested feature from us. It's now supported. What this means is that anybody, you and me, no matter what your background might be, can start a subnet now. It's so easy. It'll take you about 5 minutes, maybe. And then, again, without any programming, you can change key parameters so as to achieve the result you want. You want to have a fast network, a slow network, etc., etc. It's really, really easy to do. And, we essentially ended up supporting this because we see a huge demand for people who come to us and say, hey, we would like to launch our own subnet for this, that, and the other reason that you're all familiar with. And how do we do it? And so now this is our response to make it super trivial. So when I say to you, we have a lot of projects in the pipeline. Yeah, we have a lot of projects in the pipeline. So, and then final note, what else happened in the last 2 weeks? There was the Korean Blockchain Week. I could not go to Korea. I've been to Korea multiple times. I love Korea, and I miss it. And this pandemic got in the way. I had vowed to go there at least once a year, just on the basis of food alone. Food and, of course, the people were so warm. And so anyhow, we ended up, Ava Labs ended up sending quite a team, and we ended up holding a mini one-day event with a bunch of speakers. A couple of things happened in Korea. There was a huge rainstorm and a flood, apparently. The venue that we had picked ended up getting flooded. So for a while it was touch and go. For a while it wasn't clear that we'd be able to hold anything at all. But within, I think, about 36 hours, the team ended up locating a new place, a new location, ended up moving everything and dealing with the flood in the meantime, and ended up hosting a tremendous event with, I think, 1,400 registered people, 450 people on the, at the on site at the first talk, and changing throughout the day, and just a fantastic set of speakers, 25 of them, 14 of whom are women. So just really, really nice outcome. So I'm thrilled. My only regret is I have huge FOMO. That's all I've got. I have huge FOMO. For those of you who were there, I hope you enjoyed yourselves. I gathered from everyone that it was a lot of fun. I couldn't make it, but next time I definitely hope to be there. Somebody has to eat all the good barbecue. And let's see. The overall event was a huge success. Of course, also we played a pretty big role at the Korean Blockchain Week. We had a lot of speakers there from the Avalanche community talking about various different aspects of Avalanche. So that sums up everything I have to say for this week. I'll try to make these discussions a little shorter. Let me see, 45 minutes on the dot. So, maybe I'll try to stick to that. I'm really excited. I hadn't realized just how tired I was after multiple years of building a system this summer post-pandemic, and after a whole bunch of people in my family dealt with health issues. This was a great summer for me and my family, and I feel rested. And in about 3 days or so, I'll be back in the United States, and I cannot wait. So I cannot wait to be back with my team, back with the bulk of the community in New York City, and back with the finance community in New York City to pick up all those threads that have been actually continuing in my absence, that I've been doing remotely from here, but to start doing them in person. And there's so much to launch. And I hope you have the same feeling that I do, that despite being in a bear market, despite being in a sideways market with a war in pretty significant portions of the world, with economic worries in Europe, etc., despite all that, crypto is ticking. It's absolutely strong. This is definitely a technology that's here to stay. People will say all sorts of stuff. They always do in a bear market. They jump on us. They're like, look at that, ha ha ha, what have you. But if you look around the world, look at valuable assets. Would you rather hold a gold chunk of gold, shiny yellow rock, or would you rather have Bitcoin? It's so much easier to send Bitcoin. It takes about an hour. But then you can bridge it to Avalanche and send it in less than a second. Speaking of which, try the BTC.B. Try bridging Bitcoin, BTC, from Bitcoin to Avalanche. You can do it using the Core wallet at the Chrome store. And try doing it, and you will be shocked and pleasantly surprised, because suddenly you can move your Bitcoin and you could have it participate in DeFi. So the future for us, I think, is bright. These assets are here to stay. These systems are here to stay. They provide guarantees that regulators try to enforce using imperfect means, using human audits, using human processes, post-facto policing. Post-facto policing, every now and then you discover something, and typically the thing that you discovered is being committed by somebody so big you can't even take them down. And don't get me started. I don't want to get started. I just read about the HSBC situation again. There was a retrospective article on it, and they ended up doing massive money laundering with one of the Mexican cartels, to the point where the cartel had manufactured briefcases that fit in the bank teller windows of HSBC. They had a symbiotic relationship to the point where one evolved to create briefcases to feed through the teller windows. And lots of people at HSBC were in on it. Not a single one of them went to jail. So let's not get into that. But it's clear to me that this technology is here to stay. It actually provides the guarantees that it can provide the guarantees that the regulators are seeking. Those guarantees could be built into the lowest levels of the fabric, the fairness for retail, no front running, etc. These are guarantees that are possible to achieve with our technology, And it's impossible to achieve with traditional technologies without having to trust people, without having to put people in a position of trust, which they invariably abuse. So just empirical evidence shows that whenever there's somebody that's a custodian, then you've opened yourself up to malfeasance by the custodian. If you're using a centralized exchange, there are all sorts of things that can and do go wrong. There are a bunch of threads about this as well. So in any case, this tech is here to stay, and I'm so excited to be here. I love bear markets. We're building strong, as you can see. This is somewhat of a slow month for us. It is August after all, but despite that, there's so much happening on Avalanche, and power to all the other chains as well, and power to Ethereum especially. I cannot wait for the merge to be done, and for us to move on to the new universe post-merge, so that instead of waiting for Godot, well, we have at least the appearance of Godot, and then we'll see how good he is. It's high time to see that. It can't just be all talk in this universe. So with that, I'm going to get ready and enjoy my last few days here and enjoy the amazing peaches. I hope you do too, and I'll see you stateside in a week. Thank you very much.